I think that we are pretty well populated with our group now. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Nicole Huff. She is our Assistant Extension Professor for Family Finance and Resource Management. And she has hosted the most of our book clubs that we have had throughout the last, I guess this is year 3 that we're working on now, right, Nicole? And so she is our book club expert because she is great at facilitating these programs. And so we are excited to dive into a new book, and I will let you take the mic.
All right. Thank you, Mindy. And so, yes, I'm excited. I'm excited for another installment. I love doing these. I am just a fan of book clubs in general. And so when I had the opportunity to combine financial literacy with a book club, it was a no-brainer, really, to say yes. And so this one, we are doing it in April because happy Financial Literacy Month, everyone. It is Financial Literacy Month, and so our big blue book club topic is on on finances in a roundabout way. This is a very deep book, and we'll talk about some of the key highlights for the first 3 chapters. But it is a way for us to kick off Financial Literacy Month and integrate that. All right, you can go to the next slide, Mindy. So why this book? And so it doesn't take place in Kentucky, it takes place in rural Kansas. But I thought a lot of the themes were on point for a state like ours that has a large part of its demography rooted in rural areas, right? And so I also thought that given today's just really challenging economic climate, right? It's tough. We're coming out of the pandemic. It's very much recessionary times. We have high levels of inflation. Most families of all income brackets are struggling to make ends meet, put food on the table, paying their bills. Their income is not increasing with the rate that everything else is increasing. Accessibility and things like car insurance and health insurance and prices are skyrocketing, and not to mention food and goods and services. So this is a topic that I personally relate to. And I thought that many of you would as well. Okay, the next. All right, so as we dive in, just a few housekeeping topics. Because if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Like Mindy said, this is maybe our 7th installment altogether of the Big Blue Book Club, but we are, and they've been across all topics, including family finance. But what we want is for this to be a very safe space where we respect everyone's values and experiences. Now, especially for a book like this that takes a deep dive into some controversial topics, we want to be respectful. And Mindy and I were chatting beforehand, and she said, let's think of it as a Thanksgiving dinner, right? There are just some things that you don't necessarily talk about at the Thanksgiving dinner table, as not to hurt anyone's feelings or open this big can of worms that causes an uncomfortable situation. So things like politics and religion, we're just going to leave those off the table. We'll talk about it as it relates to some of these big themes, but we want to be respectful of our fellow participants. We're also going to be using Menti and Mentimeter. That's something that we have used in past book clubs that I have hosted and Dr. Norman Bergdorf has hosted. And so many of you may be familiar with this format. It's just a good way to keep a discussion rolling when we have a large number of participants. And I'll tell you more how to do that in just a moment. But I want to reiterate that Menti responses are displayed anonymously. So your name is not attached to it. So when I ask you to give me a word or to give me a response, you can type that in. I mean, if you're having a group viewing party, then, you guys, you can still use your individual devices. I know some counties have some viewing parties going on, or you can put it in the chat. There are other ways that you can engage in the conversation apart from Menti, but know that Menti is anonymous, and that allows you to speak more freely, respectfully, but freely when we're discussing sensitive topics. Okay, and then we also, if you have additional comments, they go in the chat. And if you have questions, they go in the Q&A feature. And links to both of those can be found just kind of at the bottom of your screen. And I should be able, Mindy and I will be monitoring those throughout our hour together. Okay? All right, so here we go. If you have a personal device, a tablet, a phone, you can take a QR code of this right now, or go to menti.com and enter the code 650-0375. And then you may be able to link to it on your computer as well. All right, so we'll leave this one up just a second, and so that everybody has a chance to log on. It looks like several of you, I'm getting some thumbs up that you are able to log on. All right, I think we might have everybody, Mindy. Okay, so just as a fun way to test out Mentimeter, I want you to tell me, where are you joining from? Drag a pin. If you're outside of Kentucky, put it around the parameter somewhere. If you're outside of Kentucky, please put in the chat where you're joining us from. But if you're in Kentucky, let us know. Where in the state are you joining us from? All right, seeing a good representation. I mean, from the east to the west, the north to the south, we are all over the state today.
Fun watching all those dots pop up.
It is. I love watching this. If you're just joining us, you can go to menti.com. It's at the top of the screen. Use the code 6502-0375. All right. And yeah, you can, the internet, some people are saying the internet's being a little slow. I think that, I don't know if it is raining where you are. I am in Lexington, and it is definitely a lot of May showers. May flowers should come from all of these April showers for sure. All right. Well, good. So yeah, you can pin where you're from. I love seeing all the different counties represented. Go. I got muted. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So this also helps to show you, look at where all your fellow book club attendees are joining us from. Yeah, raining here as well. All right, let's get to the next slide. Okay, so just like all over the state, tell me, what generation do you represent? Now, there may be some debate over, are these the right titles of your generation? But who is joining us? Where are you? And these are names that are just most commonly agreed upon. I did not name these. But we have the all of the generations that have the potential to be alive are represented here today, or on the screen. And it looks like we are lot from the baby boom generation, Generation X, the millennial generation. So big concentration among those three, but I'm seeing someone from the silent generation. joining. Not terribly surprising there are no Gen Zs or Gen Alphas because most of those should be in school right now. But I included them just in case one is not and is here with you or is participating in this. All right, great. And so you can see, and this is kind of what I expect. So definitely the book looks at the earlier generation, those who would have been born in the 20s to 40s, and we see that. But we also see a lot of the baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials represented. And so Sarah was born in 1980, and so she is on the cusp of that Generation X and that millennial. And I want to say I was able to resonate. I'll go ahead and age myself. I'm Gen X, and I was also born in 1980. And so and some of you, I know, either think right now, oh, she's old, or y'all are thinking, oh, she's a baby. And I'll take either one because I feel both most days. Okay, so now tell me one word that comes to mind when you hear financial well-being, just one word. So when I say financial well-being, give me a word that comes to mind. All right, so seeing a lot come up, and then in the chat, savings, work, comfortable. So on the chat, you'll see the bigger the word, the more responses come up for that. Security is a big word. Secure, comfort, stability, comfortable, peace, fluid, debt-free. I'm seeing okay, safety, surety, frugal, calmness, resources, enough, having enough, affluent, cushion and comfortable, balanced budget, pieces coming up there, resources, safety. Yeah, this is great. Balanced budget. Okay, the next poll. All right, so now I want you to just kind of drop your agreement with these three statements on your screen. From strongly disagree to strongly agree. My finances are important to me. I feel confident making wise financial choices, and I feel confident knowing different ways to make ends meet. And again, this is anonymous, so answer them honestly, not what you wish you had, but just currently your current situation. Do you feel like you make wise financial choices, or are you kind of a spender? Or do you maybe have some debt that needs to be paid off? Are you struggling to make ends meet? Like I said, that the vast majority of Americans and Kentuckians as well are, and we'll continue to talk about that this hour. And that first slide might be a little dark, but okay. All right, next slide, Mindy. And we'll come back to that. Some of these we'll come back to over the course of the week. You'll see as we have these discussions. This is part one of a 3-part series. So please plan to join us as your schedule permits for each session. And so this first session had the most reading in it because the way the chapters fell, there was no clear way to make each week equal. But today we'll primarily be talking about those first 3 chapters. So Dear August, the little prologue, A Penny in a Purse, The Body of a Poor Girl, and A Stretch of Gravel with Wheat on Either Side. Next week, we will, we'll continue some of the conversations we start today, and then we'll do a deeper dive into chapters 4 and 5. We'll be looking at some of the things that accompany financial stress, so mental health challenges and substance abuse challenges and additional generational patterns and stigma and shame and all those things. And then on the last session, we'll be looking at really concentrating on ways to break those generational cycles and how to get out of poverty and is that possible? And we'll continue some of those conversations, but that's kind of an outline of where we're at today. All right, next, Mindy. All right, now before we begin, I just want to say that if you noticed, there were some language that I would not want my children hearing or repeating as you were reading the book. And so I did want to give a nod to this because sometimes offensive language can make us feel uncomfortable. And so I wanted to recognize that the author uses language when she is recalling conversations that her grandparents or grandmother or mother or her father that they had. And so I wanted to acknowledge that and then put it into context that these are some raw topics. She is also discussing a memoir of her recount of generational thoughts and behaviors and actions and words that were dealing with some very raw topics. And so she doesn't sugarcoat things. It is her opinion. Some of it is rooted in historical research. But I did want to put that out there, but also acknowledge that it's part of how the author demonstrates that the rawness that comes with the different plights of the characters that she is describing. All right. You can go to the next one, Mindy. Okay, so now let's dive in. Were you able to relate to any of Sarah's stories? So just think into the first couple of chapters. What did you relate to? Did anything stand out to you? And so just type those in, those responses, and they'll begin to roll on the screen as they come in. And so what parts of Sarah's story were you able to relate to? Okay, some of you couldn't relate to any, and if so, that's okay. I think that if you were able to relate, we'll talk about that. If you weren't able to relate, I think that it also sheds light into the invisibility that I think that that oftentimes people who live below the poverty line feel. All right, so yeah, so some of you, let's see. So the mother, the father, growing up in a rural poor farm, rural living, working parents, living below the poverty line. Too many things to relate to that you can see. Like growing up on a small farm, poverty, the rural family, how hard your parents worked to make it better. Yeah. And so these should keep them in, and they should keep rolling. Should we be able to see them rolling, Mindy? There we go. All right, so loss of a loved one, work ethic, struggles, first generation to complete college, the divorce, not realizing, right, our financial situation, pregnancy, teen pregnancy, living on a farm, growing up behind the poverty line. Yep, not knowing that you were poor, right? Like, I think that is something that many of us can relate to. Closeness of family, yeah, because she describes her family, but she still really views them as a tool for resiliency. I'm feeling unsafe, and so maybe they're as a female, and so related to gender differences, blue collar jobs. Oh, I love that quote. So somebody said the quote on page 44 that blue collar jobs still require brain power. Also, and I think if that quote really stuck out to me as well, but that it also requires the intelligence of the body, and that's something that we don't. Yeah, I related a lot to this as well. Like I said, I was also born the same year that she was. I have a brother that was born 4 years later. And I grew up in rural North Carolina. Many of you know that. And I married a rural boy from Kentucky. So he is from the western part of the state in McLean County. We both grew up in very, very similar hometowns. And we have the privilege of our parents' generation breaking some of those cycles of poverty. But so we're maybe one generation removed, but understanding the childhood that my parents grew up in and their parents grew up in. And I very much saw the stories of my grandparents and parents. And I'll be honest, there were some parts that made me cry just because it resonated so much with stories that I heard or saw of grandparents and my parents. Yeah, many things. And so in the chat, so the same thing, women's roles, yeah, feeling like what defines success, growing up on the farm, making ends meet. Yeah, yeah. And we'll continue a lot of these conversations as we continue. All right, you can go on to the next one. I think I got a couple of more responses. Okay, so now I want you to think for a second to what comes to mind if you picture just this pocket of poverty, a little a poor part of your hometown, your county, your community. Think about the businesses that you find there. Just think for a second about one of the more poor parts of your town. What kind of businesses or things do you see in that community? Yeah, yeah. Keep them coming, but the answers that I see here. So we're seeing liquor stores, laundromat, Dollar General, dollar store, mom and pop shops, bars, church, grocery store, small stores, small family grocery store, Dollar General, cash checking, liquor stores, drugs, places that are funneling drugs. Somebody mentioned you see farming business, farming operations, used clothes stores, quick stores, rundown stores, vaping, tobacco shops, smoke shops, hardware store, laundromat, small grocery store. Part of town called, the railroad tracks. We had one of those as well. You define that part. It was across the tracks. It was over in the tracks. Yeah. Junkyards. Yeah. Cars, greasy food eateries. So fast food joints, check cashing. Yeah. These are great responses. Yeah. I'm seeing, farmers, gas stations, smoke shops, save-a-lots, mobile homes, empty storefronts. Yes, empty storefronts, small gas stations, secondhand shops, let's say rehab facility, check to cash advances, absolutely. Strip clubs, yes. All right, so next slide, Mindy. So I want you to take this. Now I want you to picture a middle class area in your county. Middle class, right? What businesses are in that part of town? So think about like a very different neighborhood than the one you just described. Now tell me what you see in that part of town. Upscale grocery stores, coffee shops, bakeries, banks, churches. And so we see those in both areas, but they look different. Banks, a town center, a flower shop, boutiques, malls, grocery stores, organic food, nicer restaurants, pharmacies, nice storefronts, law offices, big box stores, boutiques, beauty shops, golfing area, doctor's offices, tea rooms. Okay, so some of you not seeing businesses, banks, hair salons, malls. All right, so you've got pharmacies, offices, a library. So you may have some bigger box retailers. Yeah, so I had a question in the chat. Yes, we're going to talk about that. If you're about stereotypes, we're absolutely going to talk about that. Nice landscaping, sit-down eateries, steakhouses. Yep, swimming, recreational centers, walking paths, parks, nice restaurants, state parks. All right, perfect. All right, perfect. Sit down eateries, not just fast food. All right, you can go to the next slide, Mindy. All right, so somebody in the chat is sometimes the host can see some of your comments. So what you guys just described are these mental models of poverty. But so what Sarah did, what the author did very well, was to paint pictures of what her neighborhoods look like, both in the town and in rural towns, but then in Wichita and the bigger cities, but what her impoverished surroundings look like? And so what we just did was to create mental models of poverty. And so where we think, what does this neighborhood look like in my town? Now, if you'll recall from the state map, all across the state, you guys represent all of Kentucky right now. Like really, that was one of the more evenly distributed attendance numbers that we have seen. And you all began describing the same things. So while this doesn't reinforce stereotypes necessarily, what this does is show that there is some truth to the stereotypes, but that it goes beyond a person's individual decisions. Because one of the goals of Sarah Smarsh's book in Heartland is to dispel some myths that people who live in poverty are doing so out of choice, right? Sometimes, and oftentimes, the author would argue, and as we'll discuss the next couple of weeks, some of it is out of your choice. And what we see with these models of poverty is that in neighborhoods that are historically of a certain class, we see places of business and community investments that reinforce those living conditions, that make it harder to access food, harder to access health care, harder to exercise because you're not safe going down your streets, or there might not be the park or the walking trail, or you may just have the McDonald's or the Dollar General. And again, I could walk to Dollar General both from my in-laws' house in Kentucky and my parents' house in North Carolina. They're everywhere. And Dollar General has done a really great job of putting themselves into small towns. And their prices aren't really $1. They can be very overpriced. You can pay more because, and so what it does is it charges rural, oftentimes they're in rural counties where it's easier to go to the Dollar General, and we're not picking on them, but just using them as our example, than to go into town. Just in the chat, how long does it take you to go to town, to get to your next big box retailer, or to get to a grocery store that sells things maybe cheaper than the Dollar General? Because for some of you, it might be a quick couple of minutes. For others, it could be 30, 40, an hour. Some say 25, 35, 25, 45, 25, 5, 30. And so if you are a good half hour to hour drive from a Walmart or a Target or a Kroger or somewhere that you might could get groceries, a Sam's Club that you might could buy them somewhat cheaper, you may not have a choice but to go to your locally owned IGA or your dollar store and pay slightly more, 30, 35 minutes, 20. And so very few people have said less than 5, right? Most people are having a drive. And so what that does, though, is for a lower income community who can't afford the gas because gas prices, right? Or have reliable transportation to get to that retailer that's 30, 35 minutes, 45 minutes away, you have to get what's there. And so that's where we see food deserts. We also see, and all of these things you guys said, so laundromats, rent to own, check cashing, used car lots, fast food places, pawn shops. And you'll notice the same bigger types at the top, the schools, the police departments, the churches, the social service agencies. You're going to see those in both communities, really, but you're going to see perhaps different qualities. Someone mentioned closed storefronts, or you might see a dilapidated church building that some of the windows are broken or boarded up, opposed to your nice, pristine churches with the beautiful chapels and the immaculate landscaping. It's going to look different. All right, and so kind of in the center circle, you see, so somebody said when you put in the chat is the chat pod. So there's a Q&A feature down at the bottom. One says chat. That's where you can put in your comments. One says Q&A. That's if you have a question that we can answer lately. And I can still see both. I can see both on my screen, but that's generally how we're tracking comments. So But what you see is, depending on the socioeconomic status of your community, the economic status of the community, um, considerations might be different, and how we define success might be different. How we define resiliency may be different. And so, whereas you have a high focus on relationships in lower income communities, but that emphasis is placed on achievement in more middle class communities. And so you see, and you see that coming out in the book, right? Whereas maybe in some middle class neighborhoods, you don't even know your neighbor's name, right? Like you're going. It's not on investing in those relationships. But one of what makes lower income communities so strong is the relationships that are built. And that's part of that resiliency capital. And we'll continue this theme of resilience throughout, and we'll talk about that, especially on week 3. But I wanted you to, to see, though, how hard it can be if you are born into one of these neighborhoods, and to see a way out, or to get a way out, because you don't have access to certain things. So not only, yeah, are these stereotypes? Perhaps. But is there some truth to it that is rooted in society that makes it very hard to break those generational patterns? Or if you are born into poverty, to make it hard to get out of poverty because you don't see. And then the same, some of you who said, I didn't really relate to anything. All right. So, then depending on where you were born, that can afford a type of privilege, perhaps that makes it harder to relate to other parts of your society because you don't see and you haven't experienced. And so having those conversations on both sides, and then recognizing that society, directly or indirectly, does a lot to reinforce class. And so we can see that by doing this exercise of creating mental models of poverty. Yeah. All right. Okay. So now let's talk about the American dream, right? All right, so let's talk about the American dream. And that was alluded to in the story a lot. And so I want to ask you, kind of your thoughts on that. So the next slide, Mindy. All right, so when I say the American dream, how would you describe that? What does the American dream mean to you? And you can put these in the chat or on Menti, and then it'll show up on the screen. Being debt-free, home ownership, achieving your own individual dreams. So having that freedom to individualize, being successful, home ownership, financial security, having it all, being debt-free, moving beyond where your parents were. And let's see, having a home, having money to pay your bills, being educated. I see a lot of home ownership, not struggling to afford things, having healthcare, health, retirement, having savings, being able to travel, being self-sufficient, retirement, a chicken in every pot. I love that. Good, successful life, gender equality, an education, homestead, stable finances, being comfortable, paying off debt, freedom of choice, being able to impact your community. All right, can you scroll down some, Mindy? Let's see. Owning a car, being debt-free, rags to riches, making the most of the opportunities, educational freedom. It's a lie. Hey, we're getting to that one. Safety and freedom, freedom for faith, family, employment, education, home ownership. No worries, no worries. All right, privilege to pursue passions, choose a career, a living wage. Well, we're going to talk about that too. Being able to educate your children to the degree they desire. I love that because that shows respect for their choices as well. Choice of staying home, right? Like to have that choice of of having a parent in the home to provide childcare. Okay, so let's take a look at this next one. I got a follow-up question. Is the American dream attainable today? What do you think? All right, so I'm seeing in the chat like some, it's not as easy as it used to be. Yes, but no, maybe. For some, but not all. And this is a hard question. This is a hard question to even come up with the choices to, right? Because it's a lot of maybe it depends. Not without help. Okay. Yeah. All right, so we see we're split. And so a lot of us are falling into that camp, that perhaps camp. Maybe not for everyone. Maybe it's harder than it used to be. All right, you can get to the next one. Okay, so this was a quote from the book. The American dream has a price tag on it. The cost changes depending on where you're born and to whom, with what color skin, and how much money in your parents' bank account. The poorer you are, the higher the price. You can pay an entire life in labor, it turns out, and have nothing to show for it. Less than nothing even. Debt, injury, abject need. And that may have been abject need, but yes, amen, right? And because there are days, I'm a first generation college student. And again, y'all know me. If you have done anything with me, you know I'm a crier. If I make it through these next 3 sessions without tearing up, it'll be a miracle. I wouldn't anticipate it, right? Because this is real. I can remember my parents striving to give me a life that was better than the life they had. And it's hard, right? Like, because I can relate to this. And then so I have it. I was able to go on and to do more than they did. And then I want my kids to do more than I. But then there's some days I feel like, oh my goodness, all I do is work every single day. And what do I have to show for it? And it's really, really hard, right? And so and another thing that Sarah Smarsh talks about is that that no matter who you are or where you started with, nobody's fortune's guaranteed, and that can change as well. But that regardless of your economic station, you have to sacrifice a lot for it. You have to sacrifice a lot for it. Okay, so let's look at what it costs today to live the American dream. You can go to the next slide, Mindy. All right, so by definition, the American dream, it typically refers to major aspirational events and purchases, and you guys hit on a lot of these, like buying a home and a car, being in a committed relationship, getting married, having kids, and economically prospering. And I like that phrase. And so, and everybody's vision of what they want to attain is different. But it's that freedom to attain it. And so that idea, but so, you might hear it like, I'll use air quotes, that 2 kids and 2.1 kids and a dog and a picket fence, like that kind of thing. All right, so this is a recent study, 2003, by Investopedia, which is just an online provider of financial information. But they did a deeper dive into, what does the American dream cost now? Post-pandemic, high levels of inflation, and it cost about, for a lifetime, $3.4 million. Now that's for the average American, right? So that's looking collectively at places with lower cost of living, higher cost of living, right? All right, but this estimate is for the cost of common milestones like marriage, 2 children, homes, healthcare, cars, and education, and a proper burial. All right, but what their study found is this is more And this is lifetime. This is not a yearly. This is across your lifetime to live the American dream, quote unquote. It's going to cost you about 3.4 million, which the average earning for Americans across all levels of education right now across their lifetime is just over 2 million. Okay. So across all education and income levels, Americans are about 1 million short to live, all Americans to live the American dream. Okay. And so it is it attainable? I don't know. I would say no. Can you? Where are these sacrifices? So let's look at a couple of these numbers, right? All right. So, wedding, engagement, honeymoon, that number was provided by not.com. All right, so that's a little more elective, right? So if you want to shave 35 grand, you can forego some of those things. But to just currently in 2023, the average cost of a home with mortgage, 20% down, insurance, and interest is about $800,000. And again, that's going to look very different depending on where you live. I've got some Kentucky stats here in a second. But car purchases across the lifetime. The average cost of raising 2 children until age 18 is almost $600,000, right? It's over $500,000. That's just 2 kids. The average number of children in Kentucky is 3.1. So Kentucky has, on average, more children than that in their household. I'm a mom of 3, so I help with that. I don't know where the 0.1, that's just always funny to me. Health insurance, how much that costs over a lifetime. Pet care for one cost for an average dog or cat is about $67,000 for one pet over the course of if you keep a pet in your household. And again, some of these are slightly inflated. The average amount needed to retire. So this is $715,000. Where this number is coming from, that's about 80% of the average U.S. income currently. That's supposing you retire at age 65 and you live 12 more years. Okay. And so what we know is Americans are living longer than that. We're living longer, and it takes more depending on the kind of lifestyle you want to live after retirement. And so having much more than that in your account. So this is just to, kind of give you an idea of how not attainable. And I will say the book was written in 2018. Man, a lot has happened in society since then with the pandemic, with the inflation that we have seen, with that we continue to see. And so, all right, so next slide. So let's look a little bit more at Kentucky stats. All right, so this came from a recent study. So these are very recent statistics that Yahoo.com put out on the true cost of the American dream. Now, actually, Kentucky is one of the states where it costs less to live the American dream. And so what this does is it doubles the annual cost of these things to account for savings, to account for savings and discretionary spending. All right. And so you see that this is just annually with 2 kids. And again, most Kentucky households on average have more than 2 kids. And this is assuming both, let's see. So these numbers came, a married couple, 2 children, owning a home for 4, along with a car and a pet. Right, so just a car, a pet. These are average cost. Your mortgage is considered with a 20% down payment, annual healthcare costs, utilities, education for 2 children. And then it was doubled to account for discretionary spending and savings. So what that says is that, and we're going to talk here in just a moment. You can go to the next one. We're going to look at why this isn't possible right now for Kentuckians. And lest you get all depressed one of the things we'll do at the end of this hour, and then as we go on, is talk about, well, what do we do with it? What can we do to improve our situations? And so we're setting the stage now as we move through this series that we hope you'll continue to join us. We'll talk about what we can do. All right. So, but what we know is that the American dream is not necessarily possible because a lot of Americans, especially Kentuckians right now, are living in economic distress. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a quote from the book, and this is something that a theme we saw come up over and over and over again. While we were never starved or went without shelter in a chronic way, we all knew what it felt like to need something essential: food, shoes, a safe place to live, a rent payment, a trip to the doctor, and go without it for lack of money. Okay, so the next question. All right, can you relate to this? Have you ever had trouble? And remember, these are anonymous, they're aggregate, and we can keep all of these and look through the responses. Have you ever had trouble making ends meet, and in what ways? Can you relate to that at all over the course, whether it's presently or in a chapter or season of your life, not knowing how you were going to pay your rent, put food on your table, not having health insurance because you felt it was unaffordable or unattainable? Okay, I'm seeing single parent. Right, so education. So yeah, so with education and then using the Pell Grant, right? And some of you say you haven't, right? And so if you haven't, I would encourage you to talk to your parents or grandparents if you're able, if they're living, depending on what generation you fell in, if you can have these conversations about if they remember a time. Or my kids couldn't tell you times that we've had because we weren't public about it, but my husband and I, a lot went on behind the scenes to make those ends meet that they never saw. And that's one of the beauties of childhood sometimes is you're not privy to everything that is going on behind the scenes. All right, so medicine. Oh yeah, so having kids and being able to provide shoes and socks that they need, undergarments. So first career, college, absolutely all of your childhood. Can you scroll a little bit, Mindy? Yeah, so fuel, transportation, having a time we had job loss, education, right? Not having much after yeah, not having enough for emergencies, not having a lot after the bills were paid, being a single parent, affording food, how hard it was, especially when your kids were little. And then we see that on the bookend, right? So having medicines and high prices, and as we age, some of those healthcare costs can go up. Yeah, so credit card, yeah. Or you can remember when your parents had these problems, yeah. Needing to wash clothes, right, in the bathtub because you couldn't afford a laundromat. What that does, and we're going to talk about this here in the next couple of minutes, is that shows resiliency though, right? So how can we meet our needs when our ends don't meet? And we'll continue to talk about that. All right, so the next slide. All right, so what very current research that comes out of the Gatton College for Business here at UK tells us is that the majority of Kentuckians right now are living in economic distress. About 39% of Kentuckians compared to 15% of Americans nationally. These were 2024 research, y'all. So this is very current research. So in Kentucky right now, for a living wage, that means to provide for your basic essentials, it takes 2 working parents with 1 child needs to earn about $75,000 a year for a living wage. And statistically, 62% of Kentuckians don't generate that much income, right? And so 1.1 million Kentucky households in 2022 made less than, this is household, $75,000. All right, that's a far cry from the 115. And these numbers are based on 1 child, where we know that the average Kentucky family has 3 children. So no, and so some of you are saying, oh no, I didn't know how poor I was. This isn't, that's a relative term, right? Like, let's not think about that. What we want to think about is not what label of class we are, but what are some of the strengths we have. And remember, we're in future weeks, we're going to be looking a lot at resiliency. And what about those community ties, those family ties? What are ways that you can meet your resources, that you can have food and shelter and accessible health care if your ends don't meet? What I want you to do is to understand that the majority of the state right now is having trouble making ends meet. The majority of the state right now is living in distress. And we know that the most of these are in rural counties. All right. So while there are pockets of poverty in urban counties and in cities like Lexington and Louisville and Owensboro and some of our bigger cities in the state, all right, we see a lot of economic distress and most of this in our rural counties. And so what we have to do is, one, what can we do about it, right, as the individual household? But also then how can we change that narrative, right? Because we want to change that narrative. We want to change that narrative. Yeah, so and don't live above your means. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll continue to talk about that. All right, you can go to the next slide. All right, and so one thing that we're going to do next week, especially next week, we're going to be talking about this idea of how can we destigmatize poverty? Because, you know, according to those stats, all right, that's a lot of the state is living in, if not poverty, working class, right? You have to work really, really hard just to make ends meet, just to survive. But that how can we destigmatize this idea of gosh, we need help, right? Like all of us, we need help because is working hard enough? And then what about things, these generational patterns that can be very, very hard to break? Okay, so the next slide. All right, so before we wrap up this hour, let's take just a minute to talk about August. You can go to the next one. So this was an interesting part of the book. Some of you may have found it odd, some of you may have found it interesting, but it's the author's use of this fictional imaginary character that she talks to throughout. So, and she describes August as, when deciding my actions in late childhood, I vaguely felt a new question. What would I want my daughter to do? Sometimes it was, what would I tell my daughter, or what would I want for my daughter? And so this was a survival strategy that the author used to talk, well, how would I do things differently if I were the one making the decision? You can go to the next slide. And this was an example of the author trying to break a generational pattern. So this is getting raw. So I ask you, has there been a generational pattern that you've broken, or maybe your parents, your grandparents, or that you would like to break? So it may be poverty, it may be education, it may be substance use. Has there been maybe teen pregnancy? Has there been a generational pattern that you have broken or would like to break, or that someone in your college? Right. So I'm seeing a lot of divorce, education. All right, so children, substance use. All right, so rurality. We'll talk about that. Not living on a farm. Having healthy, loving marriage. So healthy marriage, college, education, public assistance, substance use. Yeah, yeah. Feeling that you don't deserve better, poverty, lack of education, all right, women's rights, smoking, going to college, education. Yeah, yeah. All right, all right, so we'll look at this. Like I said, this is a conversation we're going to dive deeper into next week. Some of the stresses that accompany financial stress, like mental health challenges, teen pregnancies, substance use. And then in week 3, we're going to talk about tools to break some of these cycles. And so some of you said education came in, and what we can do. Okay. So let's continue with the next slide. Yeah. All right, so some financial themes that we'll touch on as we can go to the next one as we round out the hour. So these are a few of the things that she touched on. I'm gonna go real quick because I want us to have time to wrap up. But that were introduced. Okay, so the idea of an invisible hand, she said at one time she felt like there was an invisible hand guiding parts of her story or her family story or the economic environment that they lived. And so that is the invisible hand is an economic term that's been around for a long time, coined by economist Adam Smith. And it does say that what the invisible hand, that there are unseen forces that kind of guide the way the economy in a free market like America is run. Now, the theory of the invisible hand really takes the government out, that says that, hey, if we leave consumers and business owners to do their own thing, they're going to act in their best interest, and that should act in the best interest of the economy, and it should keep prices at a supply and demand and equitable. And all right. And so what I believe the author was alluding to was not that the government was out of it, but that there were just those invisible forces, whatever they may be, that were kind of changing the economic landscape. She also talks about this concept called rural flight. All right, where in hard times, and as we've seen different kind of agricultural reforms in Kentucky, we can think of the coal industry, right? But this idea that in certain towns, people leave when the industry changes, especially if they're built on agriculture or they're built on some kind of commodity like coal that is natural to that area. What happens when that industry dies? Well, people leave, right? Because they have to go where there's work. And so what that does for those communities then is it leaves them with less resources. School and businesses aren't drawn to the area, and it promotes this idea of poverty. All right, and then the last two, she talks a lot about insurance, not having access to it not being affordable, not being able to treat things from a fever, right? Like that, or more serious things, how difficult it was for her father or mother or grandparents to receive adequate health care, not having insurance, the insurance we'll need. And we'll talk more about that, and we have some resources. I will say that at the end of this series, we will equip you with some resources that we've developed in Extension that talks about. So we have an initiative called MoneyWise. I hope many of you are listening to our podcast or getting our newsletters. We've got one coming up on what are the different types of insurance and what do you need and is it good to have? But also we'll equip you with some resources for how to make things like food accessible. What if you live in a food desert and have to drive 35 minutes to get fresh fruit or vegetables? And how can we improve our access? All right, so someone asked, how do you get the newsletter? Ask your agent. So I will link you to that the next time. I'll be sure to link you to that in the next email that we send. But also your agents, your county FCS agents can get you on their mailing list, and these can come out digitally or in the mail. So definitely talk to your newsletter, and then we'll include a link in our next email. All right, the next slide. All right, so we are to the top of the hour, but what we'll do the next time that we meet is we're going to talk about financial well-being and what that means in relation to what can you do to increase your financial well-being. And so we'll pick up here next time. The next slide we'll leave you with, let's see, what's the next one? All right, so we'll come back. We'll start here with this. What can I do? Because we're to the top of the hour already. So keep going. There's only one question as we round out. Let's go with no. Yeah, we'll leave with this one. What tips do you have? So we'll start our next hour with what can we do about it? We'll pick up this conversation with what can we do? But do you have some tips that we can include? And so that as we look at how do we build financial well-being, one of the things to do is to see what you're already doing that's working well and how you can do more of it. And we'll continue that conversation. As you were typing this answer, if there was anything that really stood out to you that we didn't get to today that you would like to talk about next week, feel free to put those in the comments as that you are leaving. If there was a theme or a quote or something that really stood out and anything that we didn't get to. And so I'm seeing some really great tips: learning to budget realistically, living below your means, eating at home, using coupons, budgeting, packing lunches, cooking your own meals, paying off debt. Yes. So not having, staying off Amazon. Amen. Right. Paying credit, bartering, prioritizing, taking risks, investing. We'll talk about that. So I want you to realize that you may already be doing some things that you're not even labeling, that's promoting your financial well-being and resiliency. And then we will pick up next time with the conversations on what can we do, and then we'll take a deeper dive into chapter 6 and 7, and look at, okay, what are these financial challenges that accompany financial stress, these additional challenges, and then how can we start to break some of those cycles if it is a cycle in our family. So we hope you'll join us. The last slide, Mindy, I think has a link for book club. If you're not on Facebook, if you're not with us on Facebook, please join us. Go to the last one. And please join us on Facebook. I think one more has, so next Thursday, same place, same time, come to Zoom. We hope that we will have a chance to continue to dialogue. Join us on our Facebook group. We can continue some of these conversations in there. That is a great way for you to also put some of those things that you might like to talk about next week. Yes, next week, I meant chapter 4 and 5. I'm sorry. We will cover chapter 4 and 5 next week. The last week is chapter 6 and 7. Thank you so much for joining us. The hour went by so fast. This is a deep book. I knew it would. And we're going to continue the conversation next week. So thank you so much.